Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming out here on this beautiful day. Today, we're going to have a screening of the Oscar-nominated documentary short, Island in Between, and then following the screening, we're going to have a good conversation with the filmmaker, Leo Chang, who's here in the room. So, before we get started, if you have a cell phone or anything that makes lots of electronic noise, please silence it or turn it off, because that will just be annoying. And I think we are all set. So welcome to Commonwealth Club World Affairs. Welcome to the Michelle Meow Show at Commonwealth Club World Affairs. Let's see the film.
Kinmen had been the front line for Taiwan during the Chinese Civil War. But it was still a shock to see that China is literally right there. My mother casually reminded me that I should have a plan if China invades. We're gonna be too old to leave, she told me.
Leo, thank you so much for Island in Between, and congratulations on the Oscar nomination. Many of us will learn of Kinmen for the first time by watching your film, and if they even know about it, we'll find out more than they ever thought that they would. Why don't we start with you telling us and sharing with us the decision to make it, first of all, into a short film, but more so narrated by yourself and telling your own story, in which then we learn about Kinmen.
I think the goal for this film and the intention to tell this story was always to get as wide an audience as possible. We did initially think that we wanted to do something that's more even more immersive and spend more time there and following a story over a longer period of time. I was actually particularly interested in the tourism aspect of Kinmen, and especially, in when the relationships were better, huge groups of mainland tourists would come to Kinmen, and I always find that to be really fascinating. Especially for the tour guides, they basically have to have two different sets of language, one for the tourists from the Taiwan main island and one for the tourists from China. But because of the pandemic, we weren't able to get that. So we kind of pivoted and we thought, we wanted this to be a short piece that can achieve maximum impact and get maximum eyeballs. And that's the reason also why we approached New York Times to see if they wanted to partner up.
You mentioned in the film, I take it, trying to get a film approved to be seen in China. I take it that was a previous film?
It's a different film, yeah.
So is this one going to be seen in China, mainland China?
Not officially. I doubt that. So folks, friends in China have been sending me messages about how the name of our film is being left out sometimes in the announcements of the Oscar nominations, which is something that I've seen done before. I think that I'm actually hoping that the Chinese folks will be able to see it. I'm hoping that somebody will, rip it and this is the only time I'll ever encourage people to pirate my work and share it, in the domestic Chinese platform so folks can see it.
I could see the mainland Chinese government not being thrilled about little political notes here or there, but it's like overall it's the story about the connection between the two areas, and I would, I guess I'm surprised that would be seen as a threat.
At this point, the Chinese censorship has stepped up to such an extent that it's not even political sensibility that they're censoring. I know folks who are making films about feminism, women empowerment, that is being censored because it's seen as stirring up, trouble and conflict. One of the piece of news that I read in the last couple of years, so they have they have this no sissies rules now on Chinese TV. I don't know if you guys read about that, where if they're effeminate acting men, they're now being censored from. It's the extent of it is a little bit baffling, and then obviously, I'm sort of really, generalizing and simplifying the situation, but it is, just way trickier than we can imagine, and it's not something that we can judge from an outsider standard, an outsider perspective.
On the other side, I mean, even just as a viewer, I can't even say that this film would be pro anything other than, this is really telling your story, your relationship to it. But I loved how you described it in the film as, right, being in this three-way custody battle and it feeling like pull and push in so many different directions. What's been the response from those who have seen it, maybe even, those who live in Taiwan or...
I mean, I think that that was very intentional for me to not spell out maybe my personal political belief. I mean, I certainly have one, but I just feel like I think that the biggest goal that I'm hoping that this film will challenge or achieve is that I want to push back on this tribalism that the world has defaulted to. These days, it's you're either with us, you're against us. You're good people or you're bad people. Human beings are not like that. The world should not be like that. And I wanted to tell this story just purely from my and my family's perspective. I think if you notice the narration, I don't think I ever declare anything if it wasn't something that I had personally experienced or seen specifically through my eyes and my family's experience, et cetera. I just, I want folks to be kinder and be more empathetic and to really understand that you can read about all these geopolitical conflicts, but underneath all of that are human beings with much, much, much more complicated views about all of this, than anything. And I think that that's actually what's been resonating with the audiences, besides what you can see on the New York Times webpage, and also on our YouTube page, New York Times YouTube page as well, where our film is shown. You can see folks talking about both, the Taiwanese in diaspora talking about being seen, kind of feeling very connected to this. We've also gotten, messages and email from Koreans, from Cubans in diaspora, from folks in Eastern Europe who don't have the exact same history, but it's pretty damn similar, right? This is all relics of the Cold War, and that's been really special to see because I do feel like that was the goal, to really let all of us see that, beyond the history and the culture and the language, this is kind of naive, I know, but like people are people. And if we just hold on to that, maybe the world would be a better and more peaceful place.
I was just about to say, you may just save us from World War III. John. Yeah.
Only wish, yeah.
Take us back and, if you will, give us the prequel of this. I mean, more about your life growing up and what were your influences? What was it like for you as a child?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I actually, had a really happy childhood. I mean, I think that, because of maybe some of the coverage that folks are seeing, from the international press, that there may be this perception of, this constant threat, foreboding, scary. Every moment you're thinking, oh my God, China's coming. It's not like that at all. The threat is there, and it's in the back of everybody's mind, and it's this sort of atmospheric thing that you live with. But we had a normal life. Happy with my family, happy with my parents, my siblings, went to school, went to see movies. I was such a cinephile as a kid. I did move to the U.S. at age 15, and I was a parachute kid, which I don't know if folks know about this sort of community of folks, right, from East Asia mostly, where it kind of challenges the American immigration stereotype, For the parachute kids, the parents are middle class, upper middle class. from East Asia, from Taiwan, from Korea, from Hong Kong, in the 80s, 90s, where the economy was booming. Parents wanted to stay behind, but they wanted to send their kids to the U.S. You know, in the Taiwanese society, part of the reason, not all of it, but part of the reason was to have a path out in case something happens. So that's how I arrived in the U.S. and I spent 30 years here, pretty much, and about 7 years ago, I decided to move back to Taiwan, and that's where I'm based now in Taipei.
So when you left, Taiwan was still under a military government, right?
Exactly.
So we're headed that way here in the U.S. So what was it like?
I keep watching that preview, you know, that movie called Civil War, that is like every time I walk into a theater. And anyway, it would be absurd and funny if it didn't feel like, you know, that's a real possibility. It wasn't like, I was a child, my parents kind of, they weren't doing anything that's kind of outside of the box, so we weren't really impacted. What did happen was I left Taiwan with one set of history, and as I returned to Taiwan, the history has been completely, revised because there was such a huge chunk of it that was left out. Yeah. And what I did realize also was that I was receiving a lot of propaganda from my own government. So that was, influenced how I related to Taiwan, and then definitely impacted my identity, how I see myself.
Well, and you returned, and Taiwan is now, a leading democratic nation in that area of the country, and it's the leader in a number of things, gay rights and female president and all this kind of stuff. Globally, it's.
And I think, we Taiwanese people are very proud of that.
Yeah.
I know I am very proud of that. And I don't think it's just leading democracy in the region, it's leading democracy in the world. The voting rate is like 70%. Wow. Americans are baffled by that, and at the same time, it's a democracy that nobody recognizes. It's like, nobody sees us as
a country,
right? It's like saying like you're all in the same university and there's somebody who looks like a person, acts like a person, but you tell everybody else, well, it's not really a person. It's absurd, how Taiwan is treated globally. So I just feel like so much of Taiwanese existence is this strange performance, and it's that we're asked to play this role that we really have no desire to do, but because of our bigger, stronger, more powerful neighbors, we have to say certain things and act certain ways, even though that's not what we really believe in. So, curious
how that comes out in the younger generation, and how you might see or hear from others how they dialogue about the relationship between Taiwan and the world, and even vice versa, right? Well,
I think this is really interesting. I was just having this conversation a little earlier today. I feel like the Taiwanese identity has really evolved, and especially specifically, just speaking about the Taiwanese American identity, right? Since we're here in San Francisco. When I first arrived, I would never tell people that I was Taiwanese American, because I was raised that the Republic of China is my country. I am ethnically Chinese. I am a Chinese American if I'm in the U.S., right? If I'm in diaspora, I am a Chinese person. But in the last 10 years, I think that's has definitely shifted, for people in my generation, and definitely for the younger generation, where more and more people are much more vocal about being Taiwanese, and maybe not in a political way, but it's just their consciousness have shifted. Some of it is because now we have, Taiwanese restaurants we didn't necessarily have 15, 20 years ago. Taiwan is in the news because of the pandemic, how well the government had dealt with the pandemic. It's in the news because of the semiconductors, right? It's in the news because Nancy Pelosi decided to pay us a visit. There's just
Marriage
is so much
equality.
more.
I was going to add marriage equality.
And marriage equality, definitely for the queer people, that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
It's something very proud of. I think all of that, probably influence, people, how people talk about ourselves. And especially for the younger generation who never did have this, sort of propaganda education that we have. For them, they don't know anything else. This is just the way of being, and they find it just utterly baffling that people would not consider, who they are and where they're from to be equal as everybody else in the world.
Kind of along those lines of the changing views of it, one of our online viewers asks or says, "My fourth grade friend from Taiwan insisted I call it Formosa. Why? What's the history of that term?"
Well, Formosa, as far as I know, again, I'm not a historian. It's a Portuguese term for a beautiful island. I think it's a beautiful name, I don't know if folks still insist on that. Speaking of which, if you guys are sort of curious about both the nomenclature and also American involvement in the Taiwan Straits, you should Google the Nixon-Kennedy 1960s presidential debate, where they spent a good 5 minutes talking about the Quemoy Islands, which is the Kinmen Island. They refer to Taiwan as Formosa.
Okay.
But it's basically Kennedy saying these islands are sort of ridiculous, not defendable places to station military. So really the boundary should be the Taiwan Strait, the bigger body of water, and then you have Nixon saying, no, we're not giving those commies a single inch of the free land. So, yeah.
Yeah, so seeing the map of it in the film was just stunning. I mean, you use the Berlin, allegory. I mean, it's like, yeah, the same thing. It's like, how could that be? And then it's kind of surprising, I guess, that China didn't just kind of roll into it one day.
I think, I'm also not a historian, and I think quite a few things happened when, during that time when they decided to just stop there. I think maybe U.S. has stepped up some rhetoric and sort of threatened to defend, and also I've heard that one of the things that Chiang Kai-shek, who was the leader of the Nationalist Party, the KMT, that was the government that lost the Civil War and retreated to Taiwan. Him not wanting to give up these islands, so he actually moved all the military onto this island, at which point the U.S., can do nothing but to support. Yeah. So it was some jousting that happened. It is a very strange scenario. The people on these islands also have very different history compared to the main Taiwan island. The main Taiwan island was occupied. It was a Japanese colony for 70 years, I think, 60 or 70 years. That did not happen in Kinmen. Kinmen was part of China at the time. So it's this really interesting place, which places on borders tend to be very different and very interesting.
Curious to know maybe any responses you might get from the people of Kinmen and putting this island on the map, so to say. I mean, through the film, right? And this highlighting what their life is like, what their community is like.
Oh, what do they think about the film?
Yeah.
They wanted more. I think that I mean, it's this film is funny because Kinmen is a character that's in some ways equal to the character of me and my family, right? It's really a contemplation, an essay film about the Taiwanese existence, but I've chosen Kinmen as the place to tell the story from. So it's about Kinmen, but it's not about Kinmen, right? Kinmen and Kinmen's history is used to illustrate the Taiwanese experience. Some would argue that Kinmen is such an exception for the Taiwanese people in terms of the people there, their background and the culture there, and the belief there is actually quite different. It's a minority, but I would argue that that's actually even a better reason to use that to examine the Taiwanese existence. So for them, they wanted to see more. Maybe they wanted more history and all of that. And as do I. But I think one of the challenges to tell Taiwanese stories always internationally is it's so complicated. And if I try to dig into it more, it's one of these things in storytelling where sometimes the more you explain, the more confused people are. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's actually smarter to just keep it simple.
Is this the first film about Kinmen, or have other people done films?
There's been many, many films about Kinmen. They wouldn't just necessarily aim for the international audience.
And they weren't nominated for Academy Awards. Okay, let's stick on that just for a moment. How does it feel like to be nominated, and will you be at the ceremony?
I'm definitely going. It's very, very surreal, and I'm very, very thrilled. This is the first film from Taiwan.
Really?
That's the first documentary, from Taiwan that's been nominated for the Academy Award, and I'm only the second director from Taiwan to ever be nominated for an Academy Award. So it feels very unbelievable and incredible. But what I'm most excited about is that because of this recognition, more people are curious about the film, and then folks are going online, looking up the film, watching the film from all over the world, which was something that I had hoped for, but not necessarily thought that I would achieve.
And we're going to get the question, obviously, from online viewers in particular, but let's just get it stated. Where can people go to find it and see it and watch it?
Okay, so we partner with New York Times OpDocs, a fantastic series of short documentaries. You should just always check it out, all the other films too. So it's on the New York Times website, but it's also on the New York Times YouTube channel. Okay. So it's freely available around the world, and anybody can watch and share. We actually are in the theaters now too. One of the things that the Academy does is they partner with a distributor, and they package all the nominees for the short films together into one program for documentary, for animation, for fiction shorts as well. And it's actually playing right now as we speak in like 700 theaters around the country. Wow. So if you want to see it on a bigger screen, even bigger than this, please tell folks to look it up. Great.
Did you expect this, all, the widespread distribution, the nomination, the interest, the public's interest?
I think we had an unplanned good timing in some ways. The film was just finished in September, and as a fluke, we qualified for the Academy, for the Oscars consideration. There's all these things that you have to do in order to be considered in the initial candidate pool of like 140 films. But New York Times published this piece in December, a month before the Taiwanese presidential election. So there was a lot of attention, and a lot of people wanted to find out more about it. A lot of people wanted to speak to us about it, and we hadn't planned that. So yeah, it's serendipity, and I'm very grateful for that.
It always works that way.
Yeah, right. I mean, the more you plan, the less likely it'll happen the way you think. So.
Okay, but take us now back to the original planning of how and when you decided to make it and to approach it, like we started off talking about it, as a personal story. I mean, what sparked the initial idea, and how did you go about obviously gathering the resources to do it and coming up with everything?
Well, one of the things that is interesting. I've always, as a Taiwanese American and as a person who, Taiwanese and American, and I have both passports, as you know, now living in Taiwan. It's always been my dream to be able to tell a Taiwanese story for the international audience, as a documentary. It hadn't always been easy, I know that I am personally, obviously, interested in this particular angle on Taiwan, which is the cross-strait relationship, or really this triangle relationship with the U.S. as well, because of who I am. But I also know that will be the easiest way to get attention internationally, is to position Taiwan within this much bigger conflict that people are already paying attention to. But if you go to Taipei now, you don't see any tension and any conflict, because like we were saying earlier, people are just kind of going on with their lives, and you see people going to the night markets, you see people going shopping and hang out with their families. You don't see any visuals that represents the conflict. But in Kinmen, you see it everywhere. You know,
Because of the military
because of all the artifacts, right? Because of the spikes, the anti-landing spikes on the beaches, because of the bunkers and the camouflage buildings that are shot full of bullet holes, you know, because of that crazy tank and that crazy wall. I mean, the first time I saw those, it was like, these are characters, you know, literally they are characters in documentary films. So that was when the idea came from, to tell the story about Taiwan, but from Kinmen. We were lucky that we were able to partner with a production company in Taipei, CNEX. They've, you know, been around for almost 2 decades now, and they've always, you know, host these documentary forums where they invite the international decision makers to Taiwan to look at Chinese language documentaries. So they provided the funding, and then, you know, as we talked about, we partnered with New York Times. After some back and forth, they decided this was something that fits their programming.
So it sounds like it was easy then to get a lot of that good archival footage that was shown in the film, and some of even the historical pieces.
Well, you know, the archival footage basically all came from U.S. sources, actually.
Oh.
I mean, that's an American military newsreel that you heard, right? The whole Berlin thing. That's definitely not a Taiwanese production. You wouldn't be speaking English. I mean, I think what I always, you know, in front of an American audience, I always want to remind people that the U.S. has been there for 70 years. You know, even though the people don't know about it, the governments are watching closely, and there's been, you know, a lot of material, you know, that was shot, especially if it's related to military. Oftentimes it's American footage in the American archive that I found the stuff in. You know, Taiwan does have an archive, but the Taiwanese archive, the resolution isn't quite as good. So we ended up not using that and ended up using mostly American sources. But this is very much of a Taiwanese production. The funding came from Taiwan. The production company is Taiwanese. All the key creatives are Taiwanese nationals. So.
Okay, I might show this to you just because I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but someone asks, since words have origins, why Kinmen and not
Quemoy?
Quemoy.
Yeah.
Is that the indigenous name for the land, or what? Where does that come from?
Like all the places in China, there's, you know, people speak Mandarin, which is the language you're taught at school. Then you have a dialect, a local dialect, which is the language that you grew up speaking, you know, before universal education, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, you know, it's like in India, right? People assume like Hindi spoken everywhere. It's not true. It's a big, you know, it's hard for Americans to understand that because it's a country of immigrants. So it's not that they don't have tens of thousands of history where different regions have different languages. And if you cross a mountain range, the language is different. So Quemoy is the Anglicization, I can never say that word, of the Hokkien dialect, which is a Taiwanese local dialect.
Okay.
Yeah. Like you know, like people say Mumbai, Bombay, like all that stuff. So Quemoy was the old name for Kinmen Islands, and it was sort of, I don't know when this new name came about.
Okay.
So how often do you visit Kinmen now that you've made a film about it?
We were just there to show the film with the folks there in November, I think. You know, our Kinmen producer actually runs a B&B. That's his real job. I mean, you know, he certainly can make a living producing documentaries in Kinmen. So you know, I've been kind of introducing, like pushing folks to, hey, go visit. You can stay at that B&B and bring them some business. So I'm hoping to make another trip, you know, after this little whirlwind wraps up.
After you win a trophy, a little golden one.
I know this is such a cliche thing to say, but the Oscar nomination process is like this. It's that, you know, you only the documentarians, only the documentary branch members of the Academy votes for the shortlist and for the nomination. So to get here means that people who actually do understand documentaries, who are my colleagues, recognize this film as one of the you know, worthy one that's worthy of recognition this year. And that to me is the most amazing thing. When the winning is voted by the 10,000 members, from the actors to the special effects people and to the costume designers and makeup artists, they don't necessarily, they aren't as invested or have as much sort of knowledge, and they're influenced more by other factors. So I mean, I'm not, like, the nomination really is the goal.
It's an honor just to be nominated.
I know it's such a cliche, but it's true. It really is true. People, I used to be like that. I used to be super skeptical. It's like, oh yeah, right. Listen, but really now I'm like, yeah, it really is. It really truly is.
You moved back to Taiwan, Taipei, 7 years ago, you said. Was that specifically to be with your parents, or did you want to flee the United States?
I fled the United States with my partner, actually. We were definitely Trump refugees. Well, I mean, okay. I'm joking, but it's not untrue. I came when I was quite young, and the priority then was to assimilate. In some ways, I turned my back against my Taiwanese roots and my Taiwanese connection in order to be as American as possible, so I could thrive in this environment. As I get older, it bothered me, and I actually attempted to move back there several times, but it didn't take, because I had become so foreign and such an outsider to that environment that I tried to go back in 2005, and I spent about a year there, just wasn't doing it. So in 2007, because I had been working in Asia more, I made a film in 2017, sorry. I was in the middle of making a film in China. I had made a film in the Philippines. And my partner, who's a set designer, he had also been working in the Asia Pacific region more. And when certain someone was elected, and we looked at each other and we said, look, we actually don't have to be here right now. And going back to Taiwan will actually not be that difficult. Because of my parents are there, and I know the culture, I know the environment. So we went for it. And that's really the real reason for us to be there.
In the film, you talk about the visit to China and the vibrancy and the excitement of it. Did it ever kind of draw you and it's like, I want to live here?
I was actually offered a job in Beijing in 2005 after my failed attempt to go back to Taiwan. I thought about it, but just it was actually, I was offered a job by Ruby Yang. I don't know if you guys know who she is. She's an Academy Award winning ex-San Franciscan, who's from Hong Kong originally, and now she's actually back in Hong Kong. Okay. I was offered a job to work with her in her production company in Beijing after she had won her Oscar, and because I had just spent a period in Taiwan, and then also did a job in Singapore that I kind of wanted to come back to the U.S., so I didn't take that job. But it was an exciting time, in 2005, in 2010. China felt like it was opening up. It felt like it was going down that trajectory of being fully integrated, to the global community. There were exciting stories and exciting art being made there, and I really wanted to spend more time there, and I did. I taught there for short periods of time. I made several sets of work there, a couple series, and then a feature-length documentary. So it makes me very sad to see what has happened. It makes me very sad to see some of my friends in China who are documentarians who are now talking about wanting and needing to leave in order to continue to do the work that they do. I actually produced a film for a Chinese filmmaker now that I have to take my name off, and he has to take his name off because of how sensitive the film is. And we're actually, I can't say more because then it would sort of reveal what film it would be. It's such a shocking turn in really a relatively short time.
Yeah.
do you feel, to stay on that emotion of sadness, because I did kind of feel your sadness, I guess, through the film, especially the scene, the two women who talked about not being able to go home, and they were struggling like with that, but also you had the experience of seeing on the other side, right, what the community was like in mainland China. Do you feel, I guess it's coming back to that struggle, that three-way struggle that you talked about. I'm trying to find the word, and I don't think helpless is exactly it, but yeah, maybe tap into kind of, do you feel like you're leaving people behind by not, I guess, being able to get on that ferry, and then you have the ability to, tell stories and maybe not even share a piece of what it's like on the other side of the island?
You mean in China, right? It's a sense of sort of powerlessness, and I would say, and if folks who are Taiwanese, I'm actually very, very curious to see what you think about this. But I do feel like that is very much a part of the Taiwanese existence, this sense of powerlessness. Again, it's not the biggest part, and it's not a constant part, but it is a constant part. But it's not the dominant part, but it's a constant part of our existence. Is like when it comes to certain things, I simply do not know for sure what's going to happen there in 10 years or 20 years. I think that people make do and do their best to move forward. Maybe some people do a better job of tuning it out than others, but it's there. It's this sense of limbo and this sense of sort of like being haunted, and I think that this melancholy that you feel is this part of me, right? Again, in the back of my head, that I'm sort of saying, hey, this is what I'm examining through this particular film. The optimist in me thinks that, well, it cannot be like this always. Hopefully things would change again. But the pessimist in me think, well, I don't know when that's going to happen, and I have no control over it. So that's the powerlessness.
With the ending of the ferry, and I assume other mainland Taiwan, tourism, who most is visiting Taiwan? Is it still other Chinese coming from other routes, or is it South Koreans, or is it?
You're talking about Kinmen or Taiwan?
Taiwan,
okay.
yeah.
Taiwan as a whole. This is what's really complicated. So, by the way, the ferry has resumed.
Oh, it has.
But only the Taiwanese can take them. The mainlanders cannot. And part of that is a combination of Taiwanese government being much more strict about permission, but also Chinese government is also much more strict about allowing their citizens to leave China. So only the Taiwanese people, because for the Chinese government, Taiwanese people are Chinese nationals, so of course they're not gonna not let their own citizens come to China. This is what I'm talking about.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at
absurd.
It is one of those situations.
It's absurd.
If the governments would just get out of the way, the people would be fine.
It's totally absurd. This whole situation is utterly absurd.
Yeah.
Feels like there's a very logical solution to it, but obviously that's not going to be the path that's taken, at least no time soon. Yeah. Ironically, I have seen more tourists to Taiwan than I've ever had. Like, even just personally, anecdotally, my friends, people who are like, what are you doing here? Why are you, people are, emailing me, texting me, I'm coming to Taiwan to visit. It's been kind of a tourism boom in the last couple of years for people not from the mainland, right? For a long time in the teens, in the 2010s, Taiwan was actually quite making a lot of money, especially Kinmen was generating a lot of income from the mainland tourists. That's all pretty much done. There are still people, mainlanders coming, just way more complicated, no tour groups anymore. Yeah. But I've seen way more, people outside of China, outside of the Chinese tour group, visiting both Japanese Koreans, but also people from the West. A lot of Americans are visiting Taiwan. I think at the same time of all these sort of reporting about Pelosi and about the chips, but they're also like New York Times just did 36 hours in Taipei. I mean, you also see these really, like if you get on the United Airlines, the magazine has Taipei on the cover. There's a curiosity.
It's having its moment.
Yeah, it's having, whatever that means, right, within this really complicated context that we're in. So,
touching on that curiosity, this was going to be, my final question to you, but I'll ask it anyway. There's so much that we can keep talking, to you about. But you mentioned, at the very beginning that the hope was for the viewers and the audience to see the humans, right? This is how geopolitical issues are affecting everyday people in their lives. I'll tell you, even for myself, I've have little, some knowledge about China, Taiwan, U.S. relations. The film absolutely made me want to know more. I individually then found myself to kind of, am I, doing the three-way thing with you? I'm like, am I, anti this or pro this, or what's the takeaway do you want from someone, a viewer like me, doesn't live in Taiwan or China, doesn't have all the information? Do we continue on with a political understanding of what's happening, or we take the human stories of what you're telling us, and maybe the goal is for us to be much more compassionate?
As a documentarian, I'm a firm believer that the medium is best at, sort of human connection, like empathetic connection, right? I think documentary do a poor job of lecturing people, of sort of even giving lessons to people, like factual lessons. But if the film can make the audience feel like, oh, I relate, that I feel connected to this particular feeling of, of marginalization, of alienation. I understand this pursuit of, belonging and exploration of home. I don't think I need to give too much more sort of like the geopolitical fact for them to then next time when they come across something Taiwanese, they will be much more curious. Mm-hmm. I think that's the hope, is that through this glimpse, through this slice of Taiwanese experience, by no means comprehensive, that they now feel like an emotional connection instead of, or in addition to, an intellectual curiosity they have about Taiwan. I think that news is very good to stimulate your intellectual curiosity, but I'm hoping that this will raise the stakes at the emotional connection part.
Beautifully said, yeah.
Thank you.
My last question will be kind of the annoying question that every filmmaker gets asked, and that is, what's next?
What are you doing next? I'm actually, it's so funny, I always joke. So most filmmakers, most documentarians anyway, they make a first-person film first, after they get out of film school, because oftentimes that's the reason why they decided to pursue. I am doing it backwards. I'm actually, for my, the sixth feature-length doc, I'm making a first-person film, even more personal in this one, about my family's immigration experience, to the U.S., me being a parachute kid. Mm-hmm. But you really using that to look at U.S.-Taiwan relationship over the last 30, 40 years. I think that's the best way to explore a geopolitical situation, is by going for the micro, hyper-personal. I think that's the way that we can get people to relate and to connect the best. So that's what I'm working on next.
Great, thank you.
I guess I get to, as we wind down, I get to ask the true last question. Have you started writing out a speech if you do win? Who are you going to thank? Who's on the thank you list?
The tux is bought. or rented or borrow. Actually, borrow. I have a backup that I bought, but then this Taiwanese designer is lending me an outfit. The speech, I don't want to jinx it.
Yeah.
But I do have to think about it just in case, right? Just in case.
You probably at least have the thank you list kind of played out in your mind.
The funny thing is that the Academy sent you an instructional video about what, this is what a good speech sounds like, and you should not spend all your time thanking people because the audience is bored by that. So they encourage you to be witty and to be personal, to be authentic, which, it's true. That's what I want to see. But, there's also people that need to be and should be thanked, because without them, the film would not have been possible. So.
Well, it's not the Academies, and we have 3 minutes left, so I feel like it's okay for you to go down that laundry list if you like. We will not be bored, and we probably will applaud with enthusiasm for everyone who had been involved with the film.
So go ahead and thank the people who.
Well, I mean, definitely the people in Kinmen, right? This is really, it's their story and my story in combination. So thank them for their generosity. Definitely thank the folks at CNEX in Taipei, who gave us the resources and have been, incredibly supportive partner. The New York Times, and my husband, who's not watching this, but he's in Taiwan right now. He's actually probably teaching. He has classes today. So, I think that's it.
You did
that's
great.
Pretty fast,
that was, and very witty
I know
and
I left somebody
charming.
out. My parents, I didn't think about.
Your parents.
See, it always happens.
Yeah. Let's thank your parents. Well,
Yeah.
that was amazing. I think you're going to do great. If you get the win, let's not jinx anything. I wish there was wood here that I could knock on.
I don't know if we don't win, I'm gonna think of this moment. It's like I think we jinx ourselves in this moment. I don't know.
No, don't say that because I won't sleep.
Darn you, Michelle Meow Show.
No, it's gonna be
here's
weighing
this.
on Michelle's conscience.
No, here's this. I truly enjoyed the film. I appreciate it. It's going to be in my catalog forever. I will show my niece and nephew. I'm not going to have children, decided that. But just like you said, right? Like, yes, go out, get information, get informed, get educated. There's also this element of us that we're all humans and we can all care for each other. Leo, thank you so much for Island in Between and for making this happen at the Commonwealth Club.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, John.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up, and have a great week.